All right, folks, this video is going to be a bit of a ramble, but I think there are some really important conclusions coming up, so I think it will be worth it. So my current desk is pretty much a complete mess. There's burn marks on it, there's drill holes on it, there's stuff everywhere. The cables are kind of mildly organized because I organized them yesterday, but generally they're pretty much a mess. And the shelves are probably even worse. I've got stuff everywhere. I like tools. I collect tools. So I've got tons of tools, pretty disorganized, all kinds of stuff everywhere. But do the aesthetics of your environment actually matter? Do they make a difference to you as a software engineer? Do they increase your productivity? What about the longevity of your career? Do they impact that? And what about the aesthetics of code? Can code be beautiful? Should it be beautiful? Is that something we should care about or not? We'll explore all of that shortly. But in the meantime, I've clearly had some kind of midlife crisis and set up this YouTube channel, this tech YouTube channel. And at the time of this recording, I've already got a massive 45 subscribers. Obviously, 45 people can't be wrong. So if you don't want to miss out on this kind of groundbreaking content, make sure you hit subscribe. But like all tech YouTubers, I'll be upgrading my environment to some kind of nightclub looking office type thing. I've already got 3 LED lights pointing to the back wall in this kind of turquoise haze. By the way, midlife crises are a real thing. Check out a book called Broken Dreams by Professor Mark Jackson, or you can just YouTube him for his Royal Society lecture, which is really good. Anyway, as per the typical evolution of a YouTube Instagram developer, you'll see kind of more and more peripherals and lights, and I'll upgrade my environment as I go along, so you can kind of track that journey as you see across my videos. Hopefully it will look a lot better than this does currently. And I've now even upgraded to a mechanical keyboard, so let me just dim the lights and show you that. Okay, so this is the Royal Kludge RK61 mechanical keyboard. I'm just going to switch it on and then I will cycle through the light settings so you can check it out. It's an RGB keyboard. Some of these are based on, where you're clicking, where you touch. Like these ones, I find these a bit distracting, to be honest. Yeah, that's like kind of distracting. That's quite nice. I think my favorite setting is probably something like this, which is just kind of off in the background. It's got a slight bit of movement, but not too distracting. So this is a 60% keyboard, which means the number of keys. So the higher percentage, the bigger the keyboard is, and the more keys you get, like number keys and all that kind of stuff. It's a wireless RGB keyboard. It's Bluetooth, or you can use it corded. I prefer Bluetooth. It's got the red switches, but I think it'd probably be a lot better with the blue ones for programming. All in all, it's a very tactile and appealing keyboard, and it makes you actually want to type. It's going to improve my code. It's going to make my life better. It's going to make everything look better. And it's all for around £55, which is pretty competitive, I think, for a particularly good keyboard. It's also got a nice weight to it as well, so it feels pretty solid and quite good quality. Now, this keyboard is obviously a thing of beauty. There's no doubt about it. But is beauty in the eye of the beholder? Is it subjective or objective? Does beauty or aesthetics even matter? Now, I can save you some time and say on the first point, but what humans find aesthetically appealing is largely objective, and there's a subjective component. The second point, does it matter? Yes, I think it absolutely does matter. It matters a lot and in a big way. The aesthetics of the world around us has a major impact on our well-being. If you need convincing, check out a book called The Aesthetic Brain by Professor Anjan Chatterjee, or you can just go on YouTube and search for his amazing TED Talk. And in that amazing TED Talk, Professor Chatterjee talks about what happens in the brain when we see aesthetically pleasing or beautiful faces. Those faces activate parts of our visual cortex and our rewards and pleasure centers in our brains. Now, I think it's somewhat the same, not exactly the same, somewhat the same, whether you're looking at an aesthetically pleasing face or working with beautiful tools or looking at elegant code. Beauty matters, which is why people wear makeup to make up for their so-called flaws, to make themselves look beautiful. Now, I suspect that when you have elegant and beautiful surroundings, you have aesthetically pleasing tools, you have elegant code, I think it's the same parts of your brain that are activated. But I'm not a neuroscientist, so do just check out the YouTube talk that I mentioned earlier. So coming back to keyboards, I already had a keyboard and there was nothing wrong with that keyboard. In fact, I've spilled coffee on it multiple times without any loss of functionality. And in some ways, it was more utilitarian than this one. It was ugly, it lacked personality, but it was very functional. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. But the thing is, this new keyboard is such a pleasant keyboard to use that I've had a document to write for the last, say, 3 weeks or so. And I actually found myself wanting to work on it on this keyboard. I'd normally take my MacBook Pro and go and sit in the living room or go and sit in a coffee shop or even the library. But I actually wanted to sit at my desk and work on this document. Not because of the document itself, not because of the content. I'm pretty ambivalent about that, to be honest, but just because the actual keyboard has got such a great form factor. Now, some of that is obviously novelty factor, but I definitely think there's something in its form, feeling, and the Technicolor backlighting, but more on that later. Now, one of the things that's confused me recently is that I've seen a lot of YouTubers talking about typing speed, and in some cases, developers. Now, I think productivity type YouTubers could be forgiven for talking about typing speed because if, for example, you are a writer and you spend hours every day at your keyboard, just the ideas are flowing and you want to just get the ideas out into your document, a marginal increase in typing speed might make a difference over the long term. But for programmers, for software developers, it's complete nonsense. I wonder what kind of code these people are producing where typing speed is meaningful or even their constraining factor. And by constraining factor, I mean limiting factor. There are lots of things which could make your working life better, but constraining factors are things which are actually limiting your output. They're things which, if I was to wave a magic wand and improve, they would immediately impact your output. For example, maybe removing something that's distracting you, maybe hiring a couple of employees to do some of the grunt work for you, building you a quiet office, a faster computer, those kinds of things. I think it's really important to identify what your constraining factors are, what your limiting factors are, so that you don't end up wasting time on things which aren't actually important when you really want to increase your output, like a new coffee machine or something like that, which is a nice to have, but doesn't actually make a difference to your output. So I suspect that the developers that talk about typing speed or the importance of typing speed are the same developers that write, this many comments for like this much code. It reminds me of products that you buy, cheap products you buy on Amazon where they have a huge manual and almost no functionality or very limited functionality compared to some products which have a ton of functionality, but they're so intuitive that they just have a pamphlet to get you started and very little kind of instruction given. I don't think in my 20-year career as a software developer, I've ever been held back by typing speed. One of the things that many non-developers don't realize is that a lot of code these days isn't actually written. It's generated using things like code completion, generate functions, things being injected into the compile phase, annotation process, all that kind of stuff. Everyone knows, for example, that Java is a boilerplate heavy language. It's one of the major criticisms leveled against Java. They are working on that, by the way. But again, you don't have to type a lot of that code. You can generate it using one of the methods that I've already mentioned. Or maybe you're one of those developers that likes to copy and paste from Stack Overflow. You believe that copying is the sincerest form of flattery, and why reinvent the wheel? But either way, you're not doing a lot of typing. Typing speed for programmers is not a measure of success. Typing speed for programmers is not a limiting factor. And your limiting factors are much more likely to be things like maybe you've got a slow computer, maybe you've got a long commute, so it makes less time for work, you've got family commitments, that kind of thing, or you've just got a lack of knowledge about the language or framework that you're using or something along those lines. On a personal level, maybe you provide great value, but you don't interview well, so you can't get yourself into the kind of positions where you could really thrive. And I've got a friend like that who is brilliant, really, really productive and really good. And pretty much every team where I'm recruiting, I'll try and bring him in. And I've done that on numerous occasions just because he's a really, really good person to have on the team, but he doesn't interview well. And so he tends to go onto a project and stay on that project and see it all the way through. He won't leave to go and pursue other opportunities just because he doesn't like interviewing. He doesn't believe that he interviews well. And that pretty much highlights to me how the recruitment process is broken. If there's someone who is repeatedly very good in multiple developer roles but doesn't interview well, then maybe the interview process itself is a little bit broken, which is why I keep seeing people in various positions who don't seem to fit. They're not a very good fit for those positions. But it's only partly the candidate's fault, right? Because the organization, the company, and the people interviewing have much more opportunity to know about the project that they're running, and because they're there every day, they see what the challenges are, the opportunities, what they need, what's difficult, what's easy. And they have the opportunity to interview the candidate almost as many times as they want to, right? Sometimes they interview people 3 times before they give them a job. And it's very rare for a candidate to say, actually, I'd like to be interviewed again before I decide whether to take this job, which is going to have such a big impact on my life, right, for the next few years. Now, for me, my best work, or the most memorable work, I suppose the work that I'm most proud of, was work where it felt like it was just at the kind of cusp of my ability level or just beyond it, but not something that was so clearly insurmountable that you just completely completely lose interest in it. The work was creative, the solutions were thought through, the solutions were elegant and concise, with concise being the key word here. Typically, these solutions didn't require colossal amounts of code. They required thinking creatively and trying hard not to overcomplicate things. Now, coming back to people who worry about typing fast, these people are either geniuses or fools. Geniuses because they think so fast that typing speed becomes their constraining factor, or fools because they think it matters at all. The problem is that some fools think they're geniuses. There's an effect called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which talks about people believing they're more intelligent than they are, or more skilled at a task than they actually are. They're basically not intelligent enough to understand their intelligence level, or they're not skilled enough to understand or truly assess their actual skill level. And maybe you fall into that category, or maybe I fall into that category. But either way, it doesn't matter, because thanks to the Dunning-Kruger effect, we're not going to be aware. But joking aside, I do think I have a pretty good grasp on my personality type through various personality tests, and my intelligence level, where I might sit on the bell curve. But all these things took me a long time to figure out. Charlie Munger, the American investor, billionaire, lawyer, long-term friend of Warren Buffett, talks about knowing the limits or the boundaries of your knowledge. I personally think that you need to be intelligent enough to understand how intelligent you are. You need to be smart enough to understand who you are, to learn about your personality type. Otherwise, you'll waste a considerable amount of time in your life putting yourself in situations in which you won't thrive. And the reason it's important to know is because it has a big impact on your life and your well-being and your productivity. And you can't do much about it, unfortunately. It's genetically deterministic, or determined genetically. But maybe that's a video in its own right. But I'll say my main point one more time, because I think it's probably the most important thing to take away from this video. You need to be just intelligent enough to understand how intelligent you are. That way, you're more likely to put yourself in situations where you would perform optimally. So my questions to you would be, do you know how intelligent you are? Do you know your IQ? Do you know about the Briggs-Myers test, how you score on that? What about the Big 5 personality test? What are your results on that? Do you know what kind of work you enjoy? What about the kind of work you hate? These situations in which you thrive or don't thrive? What about what makes you happy? Do you know what makes you happy? Let me know in the comments below. I am genuinely interested. Anyway, don't type fast. Think about what you're typing. Whatever code you're writing, some poor developer in the not too distant future will have to open that code. They'll have to look at it, try and understand it, and probably fix a bug or implement some new feature under time pressure, with a scrum master standing over them asking for updates. It could even be you, it could be me, so make sure you spare a thought. Now, there was a time where some developers received remuneration based on the quantity of code that they produced. I remember a few years ago, a colleague of mine who was a few years older than me telling me that he worked somewhere very early on in his career where the developers were paid per printed page of code. Now, I know what you're thinking, you could just use a bigger font, but they were working on dot matrix printers, so it's not that easy to tweak the font and get away with it. But my main point is that what matters, or what we think matters, changes over time. But one thing that hasn't changed is that programming is a very busy and active career. It's not a career where you can coast. In fact, mainly due to Agile, which is pretty much the standard way of working on IT projects nowadays, you tend not to get the big lulls that you used to get in projects of the past. Given the number of deployments you have now, even in a day, I tend to find that every project I work on is busier than the last. So in a career like this, even more so than other careers, productivity really matters. If productivity matters, then we can work more, or we can work more productively in the hours that we're already working. In truth, we need to do both. And given that good aesthetics matter, we can work a lot longer because we're enjoying our work more when we have products with good aesthetic and form, like this keyboard, or other products too. However, for me, at least, form follows function. And I found with this keyboard, it was a little tricky to control my Mac using some of the Mac switch keys. Maybe it works better with PCs, or I just need to get used to the controls. Another thing that subtly changed over the years, and bear in mind I've got around 20 years of industry experience, is that there was a time when you'd go to work and you'd almost every day be talking about design patterns, visitor this, iterator that, or how about the old abstract factory pattern. Now, as Java has somewhat embraced functional programming, you don't tend to hear it as much. Now, Java is still an OOP language, so it's not that those patterns no longer matter or that they're now somehow incorrect. It's just that over time, people move away from problematic ways of coding or approaches to ways which just avoid certain classes of problem altogether. Like, for example, electric cars just avoid lots of the problems associated with the mechanics of a petrol car altogether. This usually means different types of abstractions. And for me, functions are just a different type of programming abstraction. So as you're leaning towards functional programming, immutability, which is a big one, TDD, microservices, etc., you will find that many of the types of problems that you used to work on just no longer exist. They don't exist in that type of programming. Those approaches will have their own issues for which new patterns will emerge. Now you can concentrate on solving problems brought about by the new architectures and new designs, or solving interesting and novel business problems, rather than wasting your life trying to figure out which nasty line of code mutated your object while you were looking the other way. Where you're writing simple functional code without all the mutation, do you really need all those design patterns? Are design patterns wrong? No. Are design patterns still relevant? In some cases, yes. Have times changed? Absolutely. So it means you shift your focus onto more useful matters. You are basically working at different levels of abstraction. For me, this has been one of the biggest changes in the industry over the years. When you worked in the industry as long as I have, you often see the same problem being solved in the same way, but with a new name. It's quite irritating, but at the same time, this chaos and inefficiency is kind of essential to innovation, in my opinion, and it keeps us working. But where an abstraction changes and whole classes of problems go away, that feels much more like progress. And progress makes us happy and sometimes makes us redundant. So what about software development as a career? Software development is a focused career. You sit down at your desk, you research, you look things up, you read, you build pet projects, you practice, and you develop code. Now, hopefully you're not just reading about writing code, you're actually writing code. There's literally no substitute for that. It'd be like reading about riding a bike versus actually riding a bike. Obviously, there's no substitute for actually riding a bike. You constantly have to try and keep up with new technologies that are coming out, assessing whether you actually need to learn them or not. And the ones that you need to learn, you need to get busy and actually start learning those. But you also have to worry about new versions of existing languages, frameworks, and systems that you use and trying to keep up with those. It's something that you'll never master and you'll keep chasing its tail, and the landscape itself keeps growing. However, if you're smart, over time, you will learn the core principles, and that will really benefit you long term. The principles that you learn, combined with the kind of knowledge that's closer to the trunk of the tree rather than the tips of the branches, is really useful long term. Now back to aesthetics. We already mentioned that aesthetics matter to productivity, and productivity is a big part of being a software developer. If aesthetics matter, does the same apply to code? In my opinion, it's a resounding yes. Good code is elegant. Elegant code is orderly, and orderly code tends to be aesthetically pleasing. Now, when code is written by machines for machines, then aesthetics won't matter so much. But in the first wave of meaningful AI code generation that's occurring now, humans are still very much in the loop, and hopefully they will stay like that for quite a while. And in that case, the code produced by humans and AI, for both of it, aesthetics matter. So to conclude, coding is a busy and complex career. It takes commitment. You can read about coding, design, and theory, but there's no substitute for actually coding. Aesthetics matter. Good aesthetics matter a lot. Way more than typing speed, but only after function. They will increase the amount of enjoyment you get from working and make you more productive long term. Now go ahead and write some aesthetic code. But before you do, please leave a comment in the comment section below to let me know what you think of the video and whether you agreed or disagreed with any of the points I made. And don't forget to subscribe.